Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Teaching Abroad panel. So first, I just want to talk about Peace Corps a little bit. Peace Corps is a 27-month service commitment, and the service happens in over 60 countries with volunteers living and working hand in hand with local leaders and serving their communities. Peace Corps has three main goals to their mission, and these goals are to help people of interested countries in meeting their need for trained men and women. Second is to help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people being served. And a third goal is to help promote a better understanding of the people that you're serving on part of Americans. This goal is great. You can take it back with you after service, and it's something that really never ends for Peace Corps volunteers. Peace Corps has 6 different sectors: agriculture, youth and development, education, environment, health, community economic development. There's also a bunch of secondary projects that you can be involved in, but for the purposes of today, we're going to focus mainly on education. Like I said, over 60 countries host Peace Corps volunteers. It's broken down into 6 different regions: Latin America, Caribbean, Africa and the Middle East, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Asia and the Pacific Islands. Today, you're going to hear from volunteers that have served in Malawi, Burkina Faso, and Kazakhstan. During service, you do get a couple benefits. You do get a living stipend while you're over there. It's about equal to what teachers make in the host country. You also are provided housing, medical and dental coverage during your service. Student loan deferment or cancellation is possible. You do get vacation time. It's usually 2 days a month, and you get a great ability and opportunity to build career skills and trainings. University of Michigan offers a program called Peace Corps Prep, and I'm going to turn this over to Kelly and let her give you a little information on that.
Thanks, Betsy. So for those of you tuning in who are undergraduate students at the University of Michigan and are thinking about Peace Corps in the future, we would definitely recommend looking into the Peace Corps Prep Certificate Program, which is a specific program that prepares students for an application to the Peace Corps program, and also prepares you by helping you build different competencies that are important for becoming an intercultural volunteer in the future. So you can think of the program as kind of a roadmap, which points you to different courses, as well as experiences outside of the classroom that will make you a stronger volunteer. So you'll notice in the side of the screen, there's a QR code. So if you scan that, you will be brought to the Peace Corps Prep webpage on the International Center's website, and you can read a little bit more about what competencies or how to fulfill the competencies to see if you can fit it into your academic career at Michigan. We do have a rolling application deadline for the first time this year, which means that you can apply for Peace Corps Prep at any time that you find out about it. So take a look at it and see if it's something that might be of interest to you.
And then just some upcoming events that we have. We have a coffee chat addressing white saviorism. It's going to be Tuesday, November 17th. We also have a Peace Corps in Your Global Career session happening on Thursday, November 19th. And if you see the QR code in the bottom corner, you can scan that and you can see all of our upcoming events and descriptions of them, and you're able to register that way. So now, an introduction. My name is Betsy. I am an MSW candidate at the School of Social Work here at the University of Michigan. I served in Malawi from 2017 to 2020. I was a third-year extension volunteer. I stayed in my site. I was in the education sector, and while living in Malawi, while the national language is English, I also learned Chichewa and Chitumbuka, which are just 2 dialects spoken over there in Malawi. On top of being a high school English teacher, I worked on a couple secondary projects. I was helping with professional development within my school with my teachers. I also did a lot of work with HIV, AIDS, sexual reproductive health and rights education. I assisted in the development of a village nursery school. I have a background in teaching English to primary school students. So I worked with my community and community leaders to build a nursery school and develop curriculums for that. I was also able to assist in the development of an animal husbandry program, which was a lot of fun. I helped breed pigs to support the nursery school that we all kind of co-founded. As a teacher, I worked, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. The hours were sometimes a little bit different depending on school schedules and how schools are set up. I mainly taught English, and I taught British English because that's the curriculum that Malawi used. I had a lot of training beforehand with Peace Corps. They do send you through 3 months of pre-training before you're put out into site. So it helps you kind of sharpen the technical skills you need to be an effective teacher. And now I'm going to turn this over to our panelists. We have Jennifer, who was an RPCV from Kazakhstan. She served from 2008 to 2010. And Michael Beals, he is an RPCV from Burkina Faso. He served in 2015, 2017. So Jenny, if you want to start.
Sure, I can start. So Kazakhstan, they actually don't have a program anymore, which I saw on the map, but when I was there, I was a TOEFL or TOEFL volunteer. Like I taught English, just mostly English. And like you're saying, I taught, 5, sometimes 6 days a week, because they actually have school on Saturdays in Kazakhstan. And my school was a smaller school, probably about like 200 kids, but we had 6th through 11th grade. There's no 12th grade in Kazakhstan. And like you were saying, British English also did the 3 months. Language was a big one for us in Kazakhstan because we learned Russian or Kazakh. Mine was Russian. And so it was a very intensive language course. Most of the people did not come in with any Russian or any Kazakh in it. I also, besides teaching English, I did English clubs, and in summer I did camps, but I also did professional development for our region. So teachers from all over the region, from mostly like small villages, would come into our city on like a quarterly basis, and I would do professional development with them for English teaching. And then I also did some professional development opportunities in different cities around Kazakhstan. So that gave me the chance to travel and then also see, because Kazakhstan's a huge country, so to see some of the other regions and also help other volunteers with their work. Trying to think if there's anything else you'd like me to highlight in particular.
Maybe could you tell us like what a normal day looked like for you, like going to school, working?
Yeah. So, I lived with a host family for the first year, forgot to say that. And then the second year I was actually able to have my own apartment because I lived in a city where it was large enough. A lot of our volunteers in smaller villages didn't have that option. So I walked to school every morning. When I was with my host family, I took a bus or a marshutka, like a small van, to my school sometimes because my host family lived out of town a little bit. And then I would just be at school for like the whole day, so till probably like 4 or 5. And I co-taught some of my lessons with a teacher that I worked with, and some of the lessons I did independently. But I taught all of the grades at the school as much as I could. And yeah, we would be at school for lunch, wouldn't go home until the evening, and then we'd go home to be with my host family. And I really like cooking, so I always tried to cook with my host family, which was really fun. And then, yeah, get up in the morning and do it again.
Great. And then just a question. So if going into Peace Corps, if there was something that you could tell yourself before you entered as a teacher, is there anything that, you wish that you had prepared more for, or anything you would have told yourself?
Yeah. So my background, I actually went to school for secondary education for history. So I think for me, one of the best things was having that education background already. So I think if you don't have a background in education, the more volunteering opportunities or any opportunities you can get where you can go, like work in a classroom mentoring kids or like volunteering to teach. I think those opportunities really help. I think the other thing that I did beforehand, which I would recommend, is if you know someone in the country or you can get in contact with them, to ask them what they would recommend you bring or what skills or things you should work on before you come. I actually contacted someone and she gave me a lot of really good tips on like things to bring clothing wise and things for the classroom, things like that. I mean, it varies from country to country. So it's really nice to be able to ask someone in the country to get an idea of what you need.
Great, thank you. All right, Michael.
All right. So yeah, my name is Michael Beals. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Burkina Faso, which is a small landlocked country in West Africa from 2015 to 2017. Similar to Jenny, the program doesn't exist anymore. They had to close down operations pre-pandemic due to increased terrorist activity and hostility in the region. I was luckily able to complete my service. However, about 6 months after I finished, they shut down the program indefinitely. My primary project was actually in the Community Economic Development, or SED program. And I did have intentions of getting involved with our local middle school in my village, which was in the northern part of the country in the Sahel Desert. However, about 2 weeks after I got to my village, after they dropped me off, our middle school director asked what my schedule was like, because the only English teacher at our school had just kind of bailed and left. And he asked me how I'd like to teach 180 students English in French, because French is the national language. And I said, sure, why not? And so I ended up teaching for the final trimester of school 3 classes of about 6th grade English. And it was a crazy experience. Somehow we got through it. And so the following year, I ended up teaching 7th grade equivalent English for 1 class. And so I did that for a full academic year. And in addition to the classroom teaching, I had an English club. I did a few other activities with students, such as I had a session with our female students on family planning and the menstrual cycle, because it was kind of a taboo thing. I also led a few leadership development conferences for students across the country. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kind of dig more into that experience. But that was, what I did in Burkina at a high level. So yeah, education ended up being a huge part of my service, even though before I had no idea that it would be. I had no training. I kind of had to figure it out on the fly, but I was happy to do it.
Yeah, if you could just go into maybe a typical day going to school, what that looked like for you.
Yeah, so during my full academic year, I only taught 1 class. So we'd have class, I think 3 times per week. So I would bike the few miles to the school. It was nice only having 1 class, because I was able to prepare a lot in advance, take time kind of grading and reading assignments. And then the classes were about 2 hours each. And so whenever I was teaching, I kind of was just doing my own curriculum, because the teacher gave me some basic stuff to cover, but he kind of left it up to me. Anyway, teaching was my secondary project, so it would only take up a few 6-7 classroom hours each week, and of course there was grading and pre-work beforehand. But I would wake up usually around 6 o'clock, read for a few hours. Really enjoyed the slow mornings. Would spend some time with my other activities. Did a lot of gardening and agribusiness projects. But it was nice having that kind of set schedule of teaching, because it gave me some, more structure to my schedule. And it was really awesome also connecting with the students. Reaching 7th grade was pretty, I guess, rare for the overall student population in my region of the country. So the kids who were able to get to that level really had a good shot of graduating high school. And so my goal was just to push them as much as I could in the English classroom, while also, you know, helping them see the importance of education and prioritizing that, because you know, oftentimes there's a lot of other priorities in the village setting. And yeah, after that, I mean, after school is done, go home, read some more, chat with my friends in the village, and yeah, go to bed by like 9 o'clock.
Thanks. Yeah. I think it's a cool comparison because we both served in the African region, which is pretty interesting to see like the parallels between both of our services. I don't know how much I went into my typical day, so I can go through it now. I would, again, wake up in the morning. School began at 7:30. I would head to school. I was about a mile away, so it took me about 20 minutes to get there every morning. I would get in, you know, instruct in Malawi. Cleaning is a big deal. I don't know if that was the same in your schools. So every morning I would get there and would find the kids cleaning. So it's a lot of like enforcing those rules and helping the school monitors make sure the school's ready for the day. And then I would go in. I taught 14 periods, so that's like 14 classes in a week, which was really fun. I actually really enjoyed teaching. Again, getting to know the students. Michael, you were talking about like making relationships with them was really great, and seeing them succeed was awesome. A reason I stayed a third year was so that I could see my students graduate. So yeah, I think the connections to students, and then you have like this open platform to dig really deep into different projects that you're passionate about, like sexual reproductive health and rights, or HIV, or economic development, things like that. So yeah, that's super cool. So do you guys have anything else you want to share about serving, teaching, even teacher development?
I can talk. One of the things I would say with the professional development that I did is that the way that they taught is very different from the way that we teach languages. And so I think that was something that I found was one of the best things about my service, because the teachers were just so excited to learn about like how to use a communicative approach to teach English instead of just like rote memorization. And so getting to introduce like lots of fun activities to the teachers, and especially working with teachers that were from the villages that in many cases had never met an American before, was really a rewarding thing. And it also, I felt like, widened the reach of our program, because in the city, you know, I'm teaching at one school, but then if I'm able to reach all those teachers, it was so much more, you know, so many more kids that are getting that experience.
Yeah, I can add just a bit more. So I guess the input I can provide is more on like the emotional or cultural aspects of teaching. In terms of like the pedagogy and how I taught, I wouldn't really recommend it. I was just trying to figure out stuff. I was like downloading lesson plans on my small brick phone, trying to figure out like how to teach correct grammar. But what was really more difficult was combining my cultural norms of how I was educated in the US with the cultural norms of Burkina Faso. And so one kind of stark difference at the outset was there was kind of I guess for lack of it, there was a hitting culture in Burkina Faso. People would hit each other like physically all the time in the family. And it also happened in the schools, which really shocked me. And I know that there may have been some laws to prevent that from happening, but if students were late or if they kind of made any big mistakes, you know, there was physical striking. And so as a Peace Corps volunteer, you kind of find yourself in these weird situations where I was extremely upset and I wanted to speak up, but I also know that more or less that is the way things are done. And so instead of kind of confronting people at front, I would talk to educators, talk to students more in private just to see. And like that's just one example of kind of the difficulties I faced. I also know that students were extremely, and yeah, this is all like kind of negative, but it was what happened. Students were extremely embarrassed and ashamed a lot of the times to speak up. And it's because the teaching culture was one where not only will they sometimes like hit you, but teachers would embarrass their students for getting stuff wrong. And that, me as a teacher, I would really want the kids to open up, try, even if they were going to make mistakes. That's how you grow and you learn. And so it was like a 2-year process for me to get kids to open up and attempt to speak English, even if they were going to make mistakes. So I tried to hack their learning system by creating teams and creating games and providing rewards. Sometimes it was not enough because people were kind of set in their ways, but I think that know that if you teach in a lot of these places, you're going to be confronted with a different environment and norms. So just be ready. It's going to be tough, but there are ways to make improvements, even if they're incremental.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There are a lot of cultural differences in education styles across the globe. So definitely being prepared to confront those differences and internally deal with them is super important, as any field and as a Peace Corps volunteer, for sure. Yeah.
I have a question actually for both panelists. First of all, thank you both for sharing your stories. And I think it's interesting, Michael, even though education was not your primary sector, you did end up teaching quite a bit. And I think that just kind of underscores that, like, regardless of what sector you end up volunteering in with the Peace Corps, education is probably going to be a part of it. So I think that's kind of an important reminder and something that I kind of took away from your presentation. But my question is that, obviously, maybe in an ideal world, folks going into the education sector would have some sort of background with teaching or education, perhaps a bachelor's degree or more. But I know not everyone going into the Peace Corps education sector does have like concrete skills, teaching skills. So I'm wondering if you both could speak a little bit about what type of preparation Peace Corps offers during the training to basically teach volunteers how to teach. If there is, training on curriculum planning and things like that, I'd be curious to hear from both of you.
Jenny, you could probably answer that better than I could because I had no training.
Oh man, that's rough. Yeah, I did. So we did, I think arrived in August. And so we had 3 months in a village where we were learning language and they were teaching us how to teach basically English. So every day, part of your day was your language, but then also part of the day was learning how to teach. So there was a lot of stuff about, how to structure a lesson, how to teach English. And then when the kids returned in September, we actually did, like in that village, we got to practice teaching with those kids. And so we had a teacher who was a counterpart of another volunteer, and she was the one that led our training. And so we were in a small group. I think there was 6 of us, if I remember correctly, in our language group. And then we usually did our education stuff together. And so we would kind of co-teach with her, and then we would get to practice with the students. So it was really great because in the summer we got kind of like, learned the background of teaching, how to create lessons, pedagogy, all that stuff. And then in September, we actually got to implement it before we left for our villages and went and met our counterparts separately. So I think they did a really good job. And most of the people who worked in that program were counterparts worked with volunteers in villages. So they had a lot of experience doing it. And so they were a really great group to be teaching us. Just because they knew, like, they'd worked with Americans before, but they also knew kind of the culture in Kazakhstan and how things are taught, and were able to kind of bridge that.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience in Malawi, the 3-month training, and there are a lot of hard skills training, and then they also kind of play with the soft skills and preparing you for cultural differences. I remember we had someone from the Ministry of Education come and speak to us, and then we had someone from an NGO that is pushing the ending of corporal punishment and enforcement come and speak to us. So I think Peace Corps did a great job preparing us that way. We also did a lot of training surrounding Malawi's education curriculum, a lot of training on how to lesson plan, how to make schemes, which is something that was big in Malawi. I'm not sure if either of you all did that as well. So it's just planning out your entire term and the goals and the core competencies you're going to meet from Malawi's curriculum. So we spent a lot of time training for that. And then again, at the last, I think 2 or 3 weeks of our training, we were in a school doing like mock teaching, being observed by local Malawian teachers and getting feedback, which was great.
Wow. Okay. So what I'm taking away from this is that if you do indeed select the education sector and you're accepted, obviously, then Peace Corps does provide quite a bit of concrete training within how to be a teacher in the local context, which is great. And
yeah,
and perhaps, Michael, in your case, since education wasn't your primary sector, it sounds like maybe less training, but that I guess also reinforces the importance of everyone maybe having some sort of life experience related to teaching before going into the Peace Corps.
Yeah, I could just quickly add that I think the most important thing for me, which also makes sense in the broader like Peace Corps service, is just being super flexible, having the right expectations, and seizing the moment, if you will, and that like there was a challenge, there was a need, and even though I was not prepared at all, I figured out a way to, I guess, get the job done. I definitely relied on my other volunteers in country. I would call them a lot just to see like if they had advice or things that they could share, and they did share some resources. But it's just kind of the classic Peace Corps like scenario where you just have to kind of be flexible, dive in and kind of figure stuff out along the way. And to emphasize one of the things I think Jenny or Betsy said is, at least in my country where English was not the national language, I had some previous training in French. So that actually proved to be pretty huge because I had to teach English in French. And I know some of the other volunteers had never spoken French before they got to the country. And so their first year was just trying to learn the language. But since I had that language skill already, I was able to dive in on the first day and I guess, provide some somewhat coherent English plans and lessons. But I can't stress enough, like not only if you have a certain language skill, it is super handy, but even if you don't, you really should prioritize whatever language they speak, not only nationally, but in your village, because that's how you really create those strong bonds and how you're able to connect with your village population. And so those are kind of the two things I wanted to share.
I have one more kind of shout out I wanted to make for anyone tuning into this recording. For University of Michigan students, our English Language Institute offers a really great course called ELI 393, Teaching English Internationally. And if you're considering education sector or just joining Peace Corps, it's a class that I would really recommend looking into. It's really excellent, really great preparation for an experience like the Peace Corps in the future. So again, it's ELI 393.
I have many questions, but I'll start with just one. And for me, I was a health volunteer, and so I know there are a lot of, within any sector of Peace Corps, a lot of crossover, a lot of, secondary projects. I did education projects, I did chicken husbandry projects. It all kind of melds together at some point. But one thing that I've really seen that's like across the board is the sense of privilege and coming in as a guest and coming in as an American citizen. I know I felt my privilege in very potent ways throughout my experience in Tanzania. And so I'm just curious, how, I'm getting a lot of questions from applicants about that dynamic and knowing the history and especially what's going on in the world right now. How did you navigate that? Maybe how did that come up in moments? How did you either navigate that with maybe counterparts or students or people even back home when they ask about it? Because that is a really, in my mind, a huge aspect of coming back from Peace Corps is talking about your Peace Corps experience and not feeding into the stereotypes of what it was like, but really being authentic to your experience. So I would love to hear anything about that.
That's a great question. That's something that I know not only myself, but most people in my cohort dealt with in real time as we went about our service and our projects. I think what it came down to for me is honestly just realizing that I was in like another country, another culture. Yes, I was coming from the United States, and there were so many like noticeable differences. A lot of the times my reaction would be, we have to fix this, we should do this, this is wrong, this is right. And I really made a conscientious effort to, like, for the first 6 to 9 months, do nothing but be a sponge and soak up my environment so that I could learn how things were done, what people cared about, what were the norms. Because I was in a new place, like I was a foreigner. It wasn't right for me to come in and assert my, assumptions or thoughts on how things should be done. And ultimately that mindset, I think, really set me and my colleagues up for success, because by having that mindset, we're able to be more effective in our work, create stronger bonds and relationships. It was still very tough. Like, I remember when I first got to my village, I was like, there's so much trash everywhere. Like, this place is so like dirty. That's the last thing on their mind. Like, there's so many other priorities in their life that carry so much more weight and importance. And without kind of checking my privilege or assumptions, my service would have been far less effective. And instead, I did my best to learn, of course, share where I come from, what my life was like, but you're there to be a sponge and soak things up, and then work hand in hand with your community, not come in and fix things. That's just not the right mindset.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Sorry, I would also like to add, for my experience, whenever like someone came to me with, they assume I'm American, I'm coming in with this agency, like I can fix things, like I'm qualified. If anyone ever came to me with a project or, they expected that I was some authority on something, I would always just tell them, like, let me find someone in the community who knows about this, and I'll get back to you. And then I had a great relationship with my community leader, the traditional authority in my village, and the chief, essentially. And so anytime anyone would ask me for anything, I would go directly to him and say, hey, who are the professionals in the village or in the area that can assist me with this project in the community? And a lot of times that was really helpful to me. I found a social worker who lived near to me. So anytime there was a problem, if someone was coming to me because, their daughter or their friend was getting married and was pregnant, and I don't know how to handle those situations culturally or professionally, I could refer them to the proper channels and ways to go about that. So I think making relationships for the first 6 months, being a sponge and just like building the community bonds really helps you direct things in a way they need to go and kind of take the spotlight off of you and show people like you have these resources available.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you guys are saying. It's all like very similar things to my perspective of my service. I will say also, and I saw you guys have that white savior like thing, the meeting. That was one of the important things that someone told me before I went, is that, you need to go into this with the mindset that like you're not going to save people, because like that's not what Peace Corps is about. It's an exchange. And there's things I taught them, but I mean, sometimes I feel like I learned way, way more from the experience than I gave. And there's every culture has things, every person has things that they can teach you, and you have to go into it with that mindset. If you go into it with a mindset of like, you're going to fix everything, then you're not going to have a good service and it's going to be horrible. So, I mean, I think just having that mindset off the bat, and then just like, you know, getting to know people really closely, because, you know, when you get to know them really well, you realize that we have more in common than we have different in the end.
Yeah, thank you so much for your responses. I definitely agree, and it resonates very intensely. And so I appreciate the candidness. I loved that point about the trash, because I have been to Tanzania many times later with students, and that was definitely one of the biggest, like, whoa, there's trash everywhere. It smells like there's trash burning. And that's actually one of my favorite nostalgic smells now. I'm like, oh, I'm back in Tanzania. But that whole assumption of like, wow, this is bad because there's trash. And then we look at the bigger picture and we're like, well, what do we do with our trash here? Like, where does that actually go? I don't even know where that goes. And I think I'm recycling when in reality, I'm not really recycling. So there's all of these like much bigger picture sentiments to, I love that example. And also Jenny, that whole concept of like, we get so much out, there's that saying, like, Peace Corps volunteers get so much more out of it than they give. And I think that that's oftentimes very valid and very true. And my last question would just be, you know, if there was one thing from your service, from your time in Peace Corps, about life, about culture, about work, about anything about yourself, what was like the biggest thing that you, or one of the biggest things that you learned from your experience?
I'll go first. So obviously, like I lived with a few Peace Corps friends after, so Peace Corps was like a part of my life. Up until this day, I would think about it and reflect on it every day, at least for like the first 6 to 12 months after my service. One thing that, especially when people who weren't in the Peace Corps would ask me about my service, like you described the country. So I was in Burkina Faso, which on a lot of like the UN indicators, like human rights or GDP per capita is like bottom 10, bottom 5. And so I think a lot of people in their minds, unconsciously or consciously, are like, these are the people I would see in commercials who are really struggling, who don't have enough food to eat. And although like there are definitely a lot of issues, the image I have of my like community members is nothing but positive, because like, yes, they were poor, like wealth wise, but they were so rich in a lot of the other ways, like in social capital. Like if anything went wrong, if they ever needed any ounce of help, their whole community would be behind them in an instant. And coming from the States, where we pride ourselves on independence, and like the classic example that was always brought up in training is like, in the US, if someone doesn't let you know they're stopping by, like people won't let you in their house. Whereas in Burkina Faso, people will stop by your courtyard 10, 15 times a day just to say hi and check in on how you are. And so I really just love my lasting image of like my town, Ramza, that life is tough, but they're very, very happy. Yes, there are challenges, but they have like good lives, and they're striving to do their best. But they have such a tight knit community that really, I don't know, makes life. It was a great place to live and make a lot of friends.
I struggle with like one thing coming up, because I feel like I learned so much. But I would say back to the privilege and cultural, like learning not to judge people, you know, based on appearances or what they have, things like that, and learning to be more accepting of other people and other cultures and their choices is something that I definitely got out of Peace Corps. And I guess along with that goes like being flexible and patient with just in life in general. It taught me that to be in every aspect of my life, to do that more often. So.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jenny. I definitely learned a lot about myself, and I definitely learned how to be more patient and more flexible and more open. Going in, I thought that I was, and then, you know, my first year was a lot of adjustment and realizing that I was not as patient or flexible or resilient as I thought I was. And so I think by the end of my service, you know, that's something I really built for myself.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate and I hope that your communities are doing well right now.
Yeah, so if we have no more questions or nothing else, Jenny and Michael, that you want to share, you have anything?
I think,
go ahead,
you
Jenny.
go first.
Okay, I'll just go quickly. I know that what I shared, a lot of it had negative connotations, but I just want to like my final note to be that it's like my teaching experience was very rewarding. It was super tough, but I really am thankful that that was a big part of my service. I love being productive and like hitting my objectives and hitting my results. And a lot of the time in teaching, that didn't happen no matter how hard I tried. However, I know that I did make an impact because I'm still in touch with a lot of the students to this day. And even if like their English proficiency maybe didn't skyrocket like I had hoped, a lot of them are still reaching out to me, letting them know that like a lot of our discussions on professional development and life goals really resonated with them. A few of them graduated high school, passed the back exam and got into college, which is like so rewarding because I know how tough it is for them to do that. And so I guess my last like thought is it's going to be tough, but as long as you like put in the effort and like build those relationships, you're making some impact, however big or small it is.
And I was going to say, one of the things that I like to bring up about Kazakhstan is that everyone thinks Peace Corps is like very warm countries. And you can end up in Siberia. So just that it can be really different depending on where you end up at. So we had like negative 40 degrees Celsius, like all the time in the winter. And so it can be very different, like just depending on what country you're in. Like a lot of the European countries are much more similar like to Kazakhstan in terms of like what the buildings look like and like what your living conditions look like and things like that. So you know, keeping your mind open to wherever you end up, that it might not be what you picture in your head, but it will be great no matter what.
You could be in the opposite, 120-degree heat waves, sleeping outside, sweating.
Oh, I wouldn't have
awesome.
wanted that. I liked the cold better. I got to jump in a frozen river one time for Christiania, so that was a really cool experience.
Well, thank you guys so much for spending some time with us here and letting us, like, being really open about your service and vulnerable and answering these questions. For anyone who is going to be watching this recording, if you have any questions about Peace Corps or you'd like to make an appointment to speak to recruiters, you can head to the International Center's website and then click on Peace Corps. And from there, you'll be brought to our section for scheduling appointments or registering for different events. So thank you, guys.
No problem. Happy to help.
Apply.
Yeah, apply.
Do it.
It's worth it. 2 years seems like a long time, but it's not. It goes by.
It's not enough.
No, it's not. I wish I got a job or I would have stayed for my third year.